think. There we go.
Yep.
All right. So I'd like to welcome everyone to our Stream Hatchet webinar today called Exploring Viewer Engagement by Fan Type. So thank you all for being here. I'm Amanda Brooks, the marketing lead at Stream Hatchet. I'm joined here with a few special guests who I'd like to introduce. So I'll just have you guys say who you are, what you do, and just a little bit of experience with video games. So do you play in your spare time? What kind of gaming persona would you describe yourself as? Casual, esports, console, etc. So I'll just start with Jeffrey from YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for letting me kick things off today, and just, really excited for today's conversation. So my name is Jeffrey. I'm a strategic partner manager over on the YouTube gaming team in the Americas, and I am primarily responsible for all of our top live gaming creators. So working directly with the likes of Typical Gamer to Tim the Tatman to Courage to Valkyrie, and the list goes on. And so, that's where I spend my day to day, very much working closely with our live gaming creators and making sure that their needs are met on YouTube. And for me, what am I playing? I am a sucker for battle royales. I am still grinding Warzone. I am the sole console player on a team of hardcore PC enthusiasts. Someone's got to be that person, and I'm proud of that. So that's who I am.
Hi guys, my name is Sarah Waits. I am the West Coast lead for Stream Elements. I oversee our marketing initiatives, and so what that means is working with a lot of the endemic and non-endemic brands and really planning out and figuring out from a strategic standpoint how they can fit and be implemented into the gaming and streaming space. For me, I'm a little different. I have a entertainment marketing background. So I came from the companies like Beats by Dre and Samsung. So looking at gaming and streaming from a completely different perspective, which has been really helpful, especially at Stream Elements. That is a company that's constantly evolving and really before the times and with the times. So really starting to see, how we can look at gaming and streaming from a different lens and not from a traditional lens. So that has been really my role at this team or on this team. And so when it comes to gaming, for me, I will say I'm an old school gamer, if that's even an answer. So I still play on Nintendo 64. I don't know if that's embarrassing for anyone else except for me. So I love Tony Hawk and Mortal Kombat and games like that. So yeah, that's what I play and that's who I am.
Cool. Colin East here. I oversee gaming and esports here at Alita, which is a data analytics company. Throughout my career, I've been operating in the gaming landscape, both kind of on the data side as well as my stint at Twitch for about 5 years. In terms of gaming, I consider myself an elder millennial, and I would say, am I a casual gamer now? And then I look at my Elden Ring hours at 180, and I go, well, probably not. Core gaming still. So I somehow balance 2 kids and somehow also put 180 hours in Elden Ring, but I definitely consider myself core.
Very good.
And I'll jump in here. Great to be here among such a great group of industry peers. My name is Ben Bloom. I'm a consultant with Deloitte Digital, where I spend most of my days focused on doing deep customer research and designing innovative propositions and services for organizations. And much of that recently has been a focus around non-endemic brands and endemic brands as well in the esports space, helping them better understand customer segments and ultimately how to engage with those segments. In addition to that, I also have the pleasure of teaching at Seneca College within the esports marketing management program. And imparting what knowledge I have to the next generation of marketers in this space. So it's a pleasure to be here and have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ben. And Jake Phillips here. I'm Chief Revenue Officer, Head of Sales and Commercial for Stream Hatchet. Been with the company for about 5 years now since we made our transition from more of a B2C company. But it's been a wonderful road, and we have a lot of good friends, colleagues, and customers on, which we're excited to talk through today. As far as what I'm playing, I as well, very similar to Jeffrey, am one of the very few console strict players to be on the Stream Hatchet team. I keep that alive, and I think I'm still, although the content I think is now really starting to trickle in, but I've still been grinding Halo a ton since it came out. Yeah, nostalgia's been hit me hard on that one.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I think we'll kick it off with, we looked at the top games for Q1 of this year. And so just to start it off, looks like GTA 5 and League of Legends are still at the top consistently. So what drives these games to continue to be at the top of these leaderboards, and what can we kind of glean from the new incoming Elden Ring and Lost Ark to the leaderboards, if anyone wants to start it off?
I feel like I should comment on Elden Ring since I put it out there. I put 108 hours in this. And so we saw this a lot when I was at Twitch, and it's still always the case. Like every quarter or so, there'll be like a one or two, what we call like really passionate, but kind of almost meteor-like games that kind of pop in and pop out of the top 10 or top 15 or whatever the ranker ends up being, right? And this last quarter was clearly Elden Ring, to no surprise, right? It's a very lengthy single player game, which really lends itself to the live streaming experience, right? And so, does that mean it will stay? No, because these games that have like a finite amount of all playable time, kind of 108 hours is a lot of time, but like there's only so many hours a kind of person or a streamer or content creator can put into Elden Ring. And once that hit its ceiling, they're going to go off to the next kind of single player experience. And that's always kind of the churn. Whereas the rest of these games are all kind of inherently multiplayer based and also very passionate communities, which always drives them to be at the top. And so that's kind of like unsurprising to see this type of ranker.
Yeah, I think as well, just seeing Grand Theft Auto and like the drivers of what's really moving this content too. I think Grand Theft Auto, obviously we all know it's been out for a very long time, but still an audience that we see growing year over year. I think they're particularly interesting because I don't think they're doing a lot of kind of main influencer campaigns that they're kind of keeping the viewership and the focus on. But it's really coming from large organic and across all of those platforms too. Grand Theft Auto is one that we see a lot of even Facebook gaming viewership on, when typically they're a much more popular mobile title game. So I think that has always been interesting to see Grand Theft Auto kind of continue to just put out great content and just grow through those ranks as well.
Yeah. Just to chime in too on the Grand Theft Auto front, I think just like layer on top of like what creators are doing and why they're excited about playing that game, which is then translating into watch time. I think so much of it is just anchored in the RP server, or these micro servers that top creators are coordinating with and spending all day playing. And it's Minecraft for adults, I guess, is another way to think about it for an audience that isn't familiar with that source of content. But it's just like a fantastic sandbox for really creative creators to play and interact, almost like you're watching a TV show. So it's a little less competitive than maybe some of the other games that we're seeing, but has like the longevity. So as long as creators are still excited about like telling those storylines, kind of like the Dream SMP again within Minecraft.
Well, I'll jump in really quick to highlight one thing that really speaks to me about this visual, and that's the meteoric rise of Apex Legends, a game that has been around for a while now, but you're seeing a bit of a renewed vigor in its growth and player base. Of course, I'm sure some of that can be a result of the mobile release, which I encourage everyone to check out. I've been having a lot of fun with that recently, but you're seeing it creep up there and leapfrog long-standing games on this list like Fortnite, and I'd be surprised if it doesn't start to come up on those similar numbers of Valorant, which itself is developing a mobile version. So that's another takeaway I have from here, an interesting trend to watch, perhaps.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the other thing that strikes me about this list, I don't know if it's too early in the conversation to start talking about Web3 and metaverses, but like count the metaverses on this. You got GTA 5, 1, Fortnite 2, right? Like I'm wondering over time if you're going to see more of those type of like virtual world games kind of creep in and stay in the top world, and kind of see that sustained kind of engagement over time as more and more people are finding themselves spending time in these type of environments as opposed to kind of like multiplayer match-based games. Granted, those are still definitely here too.
Yeah. I think as well, something that's been fascinating, I think, is the different attractors, as we were kind of talking about. Grand Theft Auto, very much the RP servers that are generating most of that viewership. We look at League of Legends, obviously their esports and competitive play is so well adopted, seeing them up there. But a question for the group, from kind of, I think we have a lot of good examples of casual and endemic titles within here, but are there any titles that aren't on this list that you were kind of expecting to be at the beginning of the year this year?
I can jump in with that, and maybe my answer here is a bit premature, but with the impending free-to-play and cross-play release of Fall Guys, I'm very much expecting that to perhaps start making its way on this list. It fits the bill in terms of characteristics of the other games we're seeing here. Casual, in some sense, easy to play it with your friends, and a game that's very streamer-friendly. So I expect perhaps with the very close release of that being free to play on the Epic Games Store and then cross-play enabled, we might expect that to start to make its way on this list.
Just to chime in too, I think it's interesting we're not seeing any Call of Duty. Let me keep this honest. No Call of Duty. Say what we want around the last release. The great thing about Call of Duty is that, well, maybe soon changing, but almost every year we can expect some fresh content, and there's a lot of excitement around what was announced or released yesterday through their trailer. So I think as we look to Q4, we should expect that IP to start to make its way back up to the top 10.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey, similarly, I kind of have those similar hopes with Halo as well. I think the beginning of this year, their launch, I think was relatively well received. I think the flow of the game, and I think the way Microsoft is approaching the development of not wanting to put out title after title, but develop this one in kind of a longer tail. I think the whole community is ready and wants more exciting, good content, and it seems like they're really starting to right side that ship. So that's another one that I think we could see both of those kind of back on the forefront towards the fall.
And I want to jump in on one more thing I want to call out before we move on. I think the idea of mobile, I'm very dismissive to mobile historically, but it's so interesting to see in other markets, mobile gaming kind of superseding all other forms of gaming just because of the devices that people have. So I look at Guardian of Free Fire, you look at the launch of Apex Mobile, you look at PUBG Mobile, increasingly they're bringing a not quite on par, in my POV experience, to mobile with these kind of shooter games, but that is almost kind of inconsequential because those other markets are going to gravitate toward that mobile experience, and then by proxy they're going to consume those games via live streaming, et cetera. And then I know we're going to talk mobile later, but I definitely want to make sure we separate that and not conflate it with the other kind of side of mobile, which is more casual, casino based.
Yeah,
definitely. All right, well, we can move on maybe to the next slide where we go more into audience types. So we've defined two different types of audiences here at Stream Hatchet. We have casual and core. So casual, we have watching on average about 12 minutes a day, whereas core audiences watch nearly 5 hours of Twitch a day. So looking at the percentage of sampled viewers for how much media they consume, is it surprising that such a small population of viewers comprises the mass majority of gaming fans, and why might this be important for brand marketers in media campaigns?
I guess to me, it's not surprising. I think this is something that we've definitely dealt with, and I would imagine is impacted a lot by COVID, right? Because even from my perspective, just from where I was to where I am now in gaming, a lot of people shifted. And when I say a lot of people, it's not even just your typical gamers, right? There's so many verticals across the streaming space. So it's interesting to see that not just these avid gamers are watching, it's people that are into fashion, it's people that are in beauty, it's people that are in cooking. So I think that I would imagine has a lot to do with sort of the shift in viewers and viewership. And so from a brand or a marketer, we can now look at all those audiences across all these different platforms and all these different verticals and really reach them in different ways. So that to me is not surprising.
Yeah, I think from a vertical perspective too, if we think about brand marketers, I think if anything, this insight is really encouraging the fact that we can delineate both of these two, right? Because I think depending on the type of brand you are, you're going to want to go after a specific customer type. And I think we've seen a lot of brand marketers doing something we've been discussing internally is when it comes to mobile, a lot of brands are, hey, let's check the box. We'll play some ads kind of on mobile focused games and make sure that's our foray into gaming. And I think when you're looking at the casual versus kind of core viewer, such a huge value proposition for live streaming is the amount of time that these folks and this audience gets to spend with the brand, with the activation. So I think when, as a brand marketer, such an important question is based off of our company goals and who we want to go after, what is the right audience? Is it more casual? Is it more core? How can we make the right decisions and understand the influencers that'll get us to those audiences most effectively?
I'm curious the group's take on this, and I think it's an important like delineation. Is that like what we're looking at here is like from the audience perspective, and the term casual and core sometimes or oftentimes also gets included with like specific games. And I don't think that there's some overlap there, but there are differences. So like for example, a casual game could have a casual audience and a core audience, and similarly like vice versa. So if you're starting at like the game IP for whatever reason as a brand that you're looking to market into that community, I think it's just really important to realize that like that game IP, whether it's casual or core, will probably have within that an audience of casual and core viewers. And there's just different ways to reach those viewers for sure. And that's only specific to live. I mean, now, audiences and viewers have for a long time have had the appetite for VOD content and now short form content too. So it's really kind of pushing the boundaries of how marketers have to think about kind of reaching that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Colin, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add, like, this is classic 80/20, but what I always think is interesting when you kind of separate core from casual is core more often than not is the tastemakers that then trickle into casual, right? And that has like a 3-week to a month like lag time. So like core will find something, glom onto it, and then at some point it'll kind of trickle down in the casual environment. So if I was a marketer, I'd really want to think, how do I reach that core audience to drive and influence what the taste making cycle looks like instead of going all after casual all the time?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to look at it.
Cool. I guess we can move on to the next one. So this kind of brings it back to mobile games as we were talking. So we looked at mobile game downloads versus live streaming hours watched, and saw that about 80% of games downloaded are casual, but they only make up about 4% of games or hours watched on live streaming. So is it surprising that this is inverse, and how might a brand read this in context of running a media buy, for example?
So first of all, I'll just say, Jeffrey, this is a perfect example of what you were describing earlier, what we're talking about core mobile games as opposed to a core audience. So important that we keep making that distinction. But I'm personally not super surprised by the inversion. I think it's representative of what you see in non-mobile games as well, where those battle royales and those competitive games typically get more viewership than your casual titles. I think for marketers, what they need to think about is, although from a play and ingestion point of view, more people are putting their hands on casual games. If you're trying to reach those people, they're not watching those games, and many people aren't watching those games. So you have to think about perhaps pivoting your approach to show up in places that are more around core or competitive titles, even though you're trying to reach the audience that might be gaming in a more casual fashion. So you might have to just flip that orthodoxy in your mind if you're really trying to be successful.
Yeah, I guess a question for Sarah, like how might like Stream Elements read this data, like from a marketing perspective also?
So what's interesting is for us, and I don't know if this is the answer that they want, but like a lot of the times the brands will come to us in terms of like a target demo and not necessarily say they want core versus casual. A lot of the times they're looking to hit everybody or one type, right? So I would look at this data and not necessarily think we want to appeal to one versus the other, but thinking about a strategy that will hit all of those audiences and beyond. A lot of the times we're really trying to identify with the gamer or the player and then their community, right? But then also looking at a big thing for us, especially over the last year or so, is thinking about how we're multi-platform. So especially thinking about mobile, right? But then also looking at not necessarily just Twitch or YouTube, but also thinking about how to amplify whatever we're doing across various platforms. So I think that like this data is interesting, but I think the way that we've been really starting to think about and sort of strategize our campaigns is not necessarily only appealing to one type of person, but multiple different viewers.
Definitely.
I look at this and I'm not at all shocked. I think a couple of things I kind of stem out of this. One, I feel like this is the tale as old as time, but like continually educating the people the difference between like casual mobile gamer, which skews 40 plus and, has its own kind of demographic behaviors relative to, the core gamer who's much younger and plays a different type of game, typically speaking, right? So it's like one. And then two, beyond that, really kind of making sure that brands and agencies and anyone looking to try to reach this audience isn't doing the classic like check the box, right, sort of thing, like, oh, gaming is everything, so I'm going to check the box. Because like we're at a point where everybody games, like, and not just everybody young but everybody old too. They all play a game. It's whether they understand they're a gamer, because like those hyper casual casino games are games, and I'll be the first to admit they are games. It's just not a game that I necessarily play, but they're still games. So technically everybody's a gamer. And like people aren't making TV buys based solely on they watch television, so we just going to put an ad everywhere, right? Like they go network by network, show by show, understand the audiences of those type of shows, and they build like brands. Certain brands will advertise on certain shows because they have a better understanding that they have a higher household income, they're more engaged with auto, whatever that might be. But they still treat gaming as just like one single checkbox. So I look at this and say, move away from checkbox buying and go into more sophisticated ad buys, partnerships, etc., which is what you're already doing on other platforms.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, because I think from an audience perspective and even like brand perception, a question I kind of have is do you think, because to your point, Colin, if I'm Gatorade, makes a lot of sense for me to be targeting directly on ESPN. That's going to have a high overlap, but obviously with something like Bravo, maybe it's not as high. But do you think that brands coming into the space kind of for the group, do you think that the audience still perceives them as checking that games box, or, hey, I saw so-and-so in gaming because they came up on a Candy Crush ad on my phone? Or do you think in order for audiences to really feel like a brand is in gaming, they need to be doing it in a more kind of esports and influencer centric way to at least check that box?
I mean, my POV, just to answer the question, Jake, I just think they have to be authentic to their own brand, right?
Sure.
Like KFC is very authentic to its own brand. It has done amazing stuff in the gaming space, but that's their brand identity, right? And that might not be the brand identity for like Down paper towels or something like that, right? So understand your brand identity and then kind of go, well, if we're going to spend on this kind of like cluster of audiences, where does that audience also live in gaming? Because again, like I said, everyone games. So just understand your brand and like align that with the proper game title, etc.
And I think one other thing too, Jake, that you mentioned is like, does a brand have to align with an esports organization? A lot of the times, like, as you can probably imagine, I'm sure you guys have all had this question from brands who aren't necessarily familiar with the space is, oh, we want to sponsor a big team. And a lot of the times what we'll say is like, well, that doesn't make sense. You first need to immerse yourself correctly into the space. And so you are getting that, like Colin said, like that authentic sort of viewership and audience, and that they can start to understand who they are as a brand. We've been working with Spotify recently over the last couple of years now. And, their big thing is like, how do we get gamers? How do we get like every brand, the Gen Z, the millennial? And it's not necessarily you have to go sponsor a team and spend all this money. It's like, let's actually educate the community that Spotify is a true partner in a really cool way, in a different way. Obviously with Stream Elements, it's using our tools sort of like in that fashion, but it's really important that I think the education piece is there, especially for a lot of these newer brands that are coming into the space. So it's not like, I think like Colin says, and what I was saying is like, we don't even need to just check a box. It's like, how do we appeal to the mass audiences across the streaming universe, so to speak, right? I think that's the biggest thing.
I think you're touching on a good point too. It's like how to arrive within the community authentically so that it feels right behind the brand within the community, and how to go about doing that tactically as well. And like, you alluded to potentially looking at data, which I think is super important, but then just like, also just like, don't just jump in. Like this community, whatever this community is been built up over time, and there may be members day old, but there may be members years old, and it's a very distinctive community. And so I think it's just really important for brands to think about tactically how they enter into that community, whether it be like through a creator, through a publisher, and like really making it feel authentic to both, the brand and the partner that's bringing them into it. But like that first point of immersion for a brand is critical, and if done the wrong way is detrimental and very tough to kind of reestablish yourself within that community.
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that really quick, Jeffrey, Jake, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I speak to a lot of brands who are, marketing in the traditional sports world, and they'll come and want to very closely mimic what they're doing in traditional sports in esports. And, the types of things they're doing in traditional sports are arguably very table stakes, slapping a logo on a rink board or being, on a billboard around the stadium. And so there's often this encouragement that you have to give to brands that this is a space where it's not just about copying and pasting. I think esports presents the opportunity for what you're doing in traditional sports to be new and improved and find more authentic, meaningful ways to engage with fans. And so I'd encourage anybody listening to this involved in traditional sports marketing to not seek for the way that you can do exactly what you're doing in this space, but how can you leverage so much of what's different, the digital distribution model, the innovative technology, to do something more cool.
And yeah, absolutely. And like, I also say, like, think about it as a fully fleshed campaign and build a strategy with multiple tactics instead of treating like buying an influencer like once or twice as a kind of complete campaign, or buying media as like a siloed thing, or like, because I see a lot of brands make this mistake where they kind of invest in gaming, but they take the creative they're using elsewhere and just plug and play on in the gaming platform. Instead, maybe do something creative, whether that be like a immersive experience in Roblox, or or whatever game, Fortnite, and then take those assets and then turn them into media, and then kind of take that same thing and leverage that in an influencer campaign and create like a 360 campaign instead of just treating tactics as the campaign, like slapping your logo on an esport team.
Colin, I think you bring up a really interesting point. I think we've done a really good job talking about brands entering, right? Has to be authentic, needs to establishing a baseline, I think, is very, very important. I think we all touched on that. The second piece that I'm always really curious about is, Colin, kind of to your point, a lot of brands are just treating it as, okay, let's do this test budget, let's activate with these influencers, that's good. But Sarah, back to your point, even for brands that are activating with a team, or are going influencer first campaigns, or are entering the way they enter, I think another really big piece, and this also kind of leads to the mobile piece, is how do you augment that strategy so you land, but then you're expanding as well, and taking those learnings to understand, like, okay, great, my Fortnite audience that I activated with is very interesting, but hey, 30% of that audience also likes to tune into Apex. Maybe Apex is the next place, or maybe a team is my next place, or an esports sponsorship for a league. But can you talk about kind of the best ways that you guys see brands not just landing, but how can they thoughtfully expand out?
Yeah, I mean,
all right, not everybody at once.
I mean, I guess I can touch on that a little bit. I mean, I think what you're referring to obviously is like this, like, how do we sustain, right? Like, we've entered into this space, and like, what does it look like? So, I mean, there's probably a million different ways we could answer this. I mean, just off the top of my head, I mean, I think it's innovation, which is like the most boring answer, right? But I think looking at your audience, and like you said, like looking at the audiences and not just necessarily focusing on one, but thinking about from a holistic way, like, okay, my audience, loves X on Twitch, right? But then what are they doing like the rest of the time in terms of their viewing, right? Are they on TikTok? Are they on YouTube? And how are they viewing? And so that's what we like to think about too. So when we talk about that 360 strategy, from the original sort of like inception of a brand into the space, like, what's next? So we always want to, like, obviously push the boundaries and things like that, and like think outside the box, but it's really about staying true to our audiences and not going so far left that we've lost our sort of like core, but thinking about how to, I think Firehouse Subs is actually a really good example of something we've done recently. We had a really good takeover moment on, stream. And so the Firehouse folks came back to us and were like, how do we do this, but maybe like push the envelope? Like, we know that we have a really engaged audience, but we want to make sure that we don't lose those, but then maybe we could gain others. And so thinking about how we can utilize what we did on our last campaign and use sort of like parts of it, but thinking about it from like a different perspective, and like how to sort of expand our audience. I don't know if that necessarily answered the question, but like, I think it's more about setting sort of the bar and then thinking like how to now go beyond, and amplification from like different platforms. Like, that's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I guess, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Just really quick, I thought you brought up like an interesting point around like the extension of, and like tying community to community to community, so that you continue to have like some level of authenticity along the way where like a pre-existing community, albeit maybe 20%, is continuing to validate that for you, which I think is going to be super important. And so even just like from the creator perspective, again, like so many of these creators are playing with other creators and collaborating every single day. And within that, there's, you know, viewers that watch Courage and that watch Tim the Tatman playing together and then in isolation, and almost thinking about like, how do I move between creators a little bit and their communities who are playing together? It's like a chain link fence is another like way that you can kind of move between communities that could extend outside of a specific game, for example, just as like specific tactics of consideration.
Yeah, and just layering on top of that, right? Like I think the foundation to all this, and I agree with everything that's been said, is remaining authentic. But the other thing that I think sometimes doesn't get talked about is adaptability. And I think about some brands that I think have really hit it home, like KFC, like Wendy's, where they've created these flexible assets, whether it's the Wendy's avatar itself or Colonel Sanders, these personalities that are recognizable and attractive and can flex into multiple different environments, right? The Fortnite community is excited and was excited to see someone who looked like Wendy jumping into that world and playing around, and you know the Apex community would be the same, and so on and so forth. So finding a way to really craft an asset that is attractive but also adaptable into different titles where you can interact and engage meaningfully with those communities can be really, really powerful as well.
And I think that, yeah, too, like those are very identifiable, right? Like and that's like, I think that's kind of the point I was trying to make is like, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. I think that really building upon that, like you said, that foundation of what you already have and thinking about how maybe like different tactics that you can use. But that's the biggest thing we've seen too, is like, we talk about authenticity, we talk about organic content and really making sure the partnership feels real to the audience. Because at this point, they've seen every brand, you know, all over the world try to, you know, get them to buy something or whatever it may be. And so it's really allowing your audience to feel like they're part of the conversation rather than just watching another ad.
Definitely. So yeah, I think we're going to move on to the next slide, but this kind of ties into everything we've been talking about. So we looked at some of the top channels watched by both casual and core viewers. So the 12 minutes per day versus the almost 5 hours per day. Looking at these, is there a common trend around the top casual and core streamers, as well as is this kind of like reflection of where gaming is growing right now? Looking at like the core viewers, it looks like about 10 to 15 hours watched per viewer for the more core viewers. So is if a brand is like trying to maximize reach, is there a better type of viewer to go after? And what are your thoughts around these?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one because I think, well, when we think about influencers, I think something Jeffrey mentioned earlier that really kind of stuck out to me is how it's not just live hours for these campaigns and these assets and the things that these are creating. Oftentimes with these campaigns, it's going to be YouTube VODs that are going to be part of that. The live stream is going to get clipped down. They're going to have different platforms that they're going to be posting on social to let everybody know. So I think that's kind of a piece that maybe isn't as apparent in this slide, but I think when you look at hours watched, being able to understand that, hey, these are kind of the casual audiences, the hours watched is one piece, but I think also taking into consideration, Jeffrey, kind of something you alluded to, which was how are your other assets playing into the total exposure? So how is your VOD time also incorporated with this live stream time? How much is it kind of echoing throughout the different communities that this is kind of going through?
I also think it's interesting if you look off to the right and you look at engagement rates, those are all very similar, regardless of whether it's casual or core. So if we start at a place of kind of engagement and that being an important metric for brands to consider so that their viewers are feeling that brand, it almost leads me to believe that like you can reach that viewer by going through either set of creator. Maybe they're spending more time or less time within that said content. But like if the engagement is the North Star, they're touching and feeling the brand, you could enter either way.
Yeah.
I'll also add, right, I think if you're a brand and looking at a slide like this and thinking about what to do, I think your work starts here. But again, when we think about the core viewership, like I'm just imagining the core viewer base of someone like an XQC versus a Gull. And I don't want to generalize too much, but I can pretty confidently say that the core viewer of both look quite different, and it results in a various engagement rates as well. But I think you know it's good to have an understanding of how people are interacting with the channels they're watching, both casually and core. But the characteristics and motivations of the different audiences can be widely skewed as well. And so you might start from a casual core perspective, but you might need to drill down more to, well, from a brand relationship standpoint, do I resonate with the core viewers of XQC or the casual viewers of eBuy, right? Like you would need to drill down to that point to make sure that it's an authentic fit.
Yeah, great point. Because I kind of always say, like, take 10 minutes and watch the channel, right? Just to understand what's going on a little bit. Like, if you want to get in front of the kind of new hot console PC game, and you just want to have that like nice like kind of branded experience with that type of audience who's looking to see walkthroughs, then Fex for Life is the place to go, man. Like, they do walkthroughs. They're gonna play a lot of Elden Ring. It's the hot game. They're gonna get a lot of eyeballs on that particular game, but they're not. But their audience and the people who are watching that channel are very different from both a mindset as well from just a pure audience perspective than XQC. And just kind of take 10 minutes to watch the channel.
Yeah, so it looks like we have a question from someone on LinkedIn from Tom. This goes for the whole group, but we can decide who wants to answer it first. But he asked, do brands with a primarily international audience approach esports differently than the ones focused on the US market? I don't know if anyone wants to start us off with that.
I can maybe give us a running start here. I think the easy answer is it can depend. I think you see great examples of organizations with marketing activations from a local to a global level. And one way to look at it is you take a league, for example, like League of Legends and the LCS, and take a look at partner sponsors by level, right? You have flagship sponsors that sponsor the league as a whole, whether it's like a Visa or Coca-Cola. But then when you get into LEC or specific regions, you have different brands or even brands that are international in nature, just looking to focus more on a specific region. And so the cop-out answer a bit is that it depends, and it can depend on the region and the brand itself. But depending on the reach you're trying to engage with or the audience you're trying to reach, you might look to activate differently, partner with different influencers versus organizations versus leagues. So the approach would differ.
Yeah, I think as well, like even when it comes to activating, even looking at the platforms, there are a lot of different platforms that are more popular with more games in those specific regions. So looking at it from that approach as well, Twitch, YouTube gaming, Facebook, they're going to give you a ton of North American exposure. YouTube and Facebook are going to give you, I'd say, larger global exposure than a Twitch will, but it really does depend. And then again, back to the game region, the popularity, and then the influencers and where they're located.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly what you're like the latter bit, Jake, which is the game popularity by region and like understand the platforms those that game is engaged on. So like Garnina, Free Fire, PUBG Mobile, if you're looking to reach like emerging markets, Southeast Asia, like or even like LATAM to some extent, then those are your games, and the platforms are going to be primarily leaning more towards like a YouTube and Facebook. Whereas if you're looking for something more North America, EMEA focus, and this could be a different kind of game, different kind of genre, then other platforms might be more of a fit. It's just so much nuance when it comes to this stuff, and more often than not, people just look at the big number and kind of immediately say, "Oh, well, this is where we want to put our money," without understanding like intermarket like nuances.
One question I kind of have for the group. So when it comes to impressions, how they're calculated, how we're kind of valuing them, how do you guys think like live streaming kind of catches to a digital impression and how we're valuing those?
I could speak to it just from a platform that kind of enables all three formats, where like the multi-format creator that can go live, create a VOD, and like a short piece of video content is possible. One, I think it's really important for brands to realize that like while creators can create all three, they may not feel comfortable creating all three. So don't push them to create all three if they don't feel authentic to do that. Like talk to a live streamer who's outputting 100 hours a month, 200 hours per month. It's a very different ballgame versus a VOD creator that's uploading content daily or once a month, high quality. So like understand that. And then two, just like, you know, I think there's pros and cons then within each format, where like concurrency is obviously really important for a live streaming metric and engagement within chat, but like that live experience happens once right then and there, and versus a VOD, which has, you know, longevity and it has some legs to it, and there's just a different level of engagement. And so the unfortunate thing is that it's very complicated and complex right now, because they're all three formats that all have very specific pros and cons to each. And so I think it's just really important for a brand to like recognize that. And then depending on if they're entering through a creator, again, like make sure the creator is comfortable outputting those formats, and or if you were looking to reach a specific audience via one of those formats, start there and then work backwards to the creators that are really effective in doing it.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Jake. I'm very conflicted, and I'd love to actually hear Sarah's thoughts once I kind of like it. There's like this push to make all things trackable in the same way that we track like display media on the internet, which is so just strange to me, because the effect of having like a lower third sponsorship call out on a live stream or even on VOD content is very different than having it in a 300 by 250 ad unit blindly on ESPN.com. It's just not the same.
Looks like we got a little pause from him.
Who's got I'm back? I hope. Oh, I'm back. I was just
He's
saying.
back.
I
There
was
it
just saying,
is.
having a lower third ad unit or like sponsorship bug there with a content creator, they're probably going to talk about it, so its effectiveness is going to be much greater than say the kind of the 300 by 250 ad unit. Yet there's this push by everyone to count them as if they're the same, and I just don't believe they are.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, or I would say more often than not, the brand doesn't really fully comprehend the CCV versus like the view, right? And so we have to like educate them. That is like one of our biggest jobs, is to make them understand, like all of you guys are saying, like it's very different. Not to say that one is valuable over the other, but it's just different. And so, you know, I think another sort of piece of the puzzle now, especially from our side of things, is we start to include more of the what we're calling our added value, right? So this always on branding, the passive branding, because then that's going to affect the impressions in a good way, right? Like in a whole different sort of way. And that also will now affect pricing for talent and things like that. So, I mean, it's a really interesting time, I think, especially for brands, and I think the newer brands, as they start to come into this space and really understanding the difference between a traditional ad buy and what we're able to do, whether it's on Twitch or across any other platform. So I wouldn't say like one is greater than the other. I think it's just really like making sure that our clients especially understand what they're getting when they get it from us.
Yeah. I think for us, it's just always kind of talking to that point. It's not digital, it's not television, it's a bit of a mix, and that's okay. We're here to walk you through and make sure all of the questions can be answered, because I think it can be a lot scarier than it sounds.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add, I see there's a question here, but I think something else that's come up recently as we've, you know, started to tweak the way we think about it and explain it to these clients, whether they're current clients or future, is that the ads that they're used to seeing, whether it's on TV or whatever it may be, are not personal. And that's kind of our selling point at this point. Like the ads that we are creating, right? These, whether it's these partnerships or, you know, live streams, like we're able to curate them and customize them to the brand and to the audience. So that's been sort of our big kind of aha moment, if you may, is that like we are providing personal experiences for the viewers watching.
The other thing maybe I'll just add, and again, I know we have a question to get to, is there's some nuance around the viewing experience on each of these platforms as well, right? A viewer or a collection of viewers on a Twitch can result in a varying engagement level to, let's say, on YouTube or even on other live stream platforms like Instagram or what have you, right? Like there's also some consideration to be given to the ability to engage and interact as a viewer. And so, you know, to have 1,000 viewers on one platform isn't exactly equal to having 1,000 viewers on another. There's just nuance there that needs to be understood as well.
Definitely. All right. So Min has a question on how much do you think the casual viewers are driven by drops programs for Q1 of this year, and I guess just overall in general?
I can take a first kick at the can at that question. I think I would be surprised if it didn't drive at least some level of casual viewership. Although I would argue that it's probably doing more in the way of core viewership. And you see this in our mobile, in the mobile graphic that was up earlier. But I think we need to remind ourselves that people aren't always watching what they play and playing what they watch. And I think for drops and something like that, that encourages a core viewer who's maybe playing, let's say, a lot of Valorant or League of Legends to then watch something that they're not normally watching and hop in and anticipate a drop. And I think drops have been an excellent way to keep streams sticky, to keep people coming back and watching. I just think that it would have more materially impacted that core viewer category than the casual side. But I'm curious what others on the line have to say about that.
Yeah, I'm not honestly, I think it is a really interesting metric to look at. I think the largest example that we've had in the past couple of years is during that Valorant beta that launched, and we saw viewership hitting an all-time peak. We saw drops. People were even creating accounts just so they could get access to it. So I think from a tool perspective, a great marketing tool, but I think it still comes back to the game on who it's actually attracting, right? Dota 2 and drops and content from that game are going to attract a different audience. Although to Jeffrey's point, we are going to get hardcore fans in all types of games, but obviously I think some games, especially with drops, are going to lean or skew one way or another.
Yeah, when I think about it, actually, I'll kind of put the marketer hat on, and when I think about this, and I think, if I 10 years ago if I was a new game launching and I was dumping all my money in like this weird split between like some print but not much, online media and TV, that like has shifted drastically where they're still doing like no print probably, but they're now thinking, how do I ensure I'm on the leaderboard of Twitch or YouTube or whatever it might be? And this is a mechanism to ensure that they are, because once you're in the leaderboard, now you're going to get people to kind of tune in and watch 10, 15 minutes of your game. But that's a great way to get noticed. You're getting like people creating content with your game, and drops is like a mechanism to do so. So it's like just really savvy marketing, and it's kind of where the space has been heading towards, which is getting content creators and the audiences to tune in, and this is a mechanism of why to tune in, just so they can get something out of it, right? But ultimately you're getting eyes on a game and really boosting that discovery at a critical time.
Yeah, I think it also, to me, looking at more like the traditional marketing exposure that this is kind of providing, is like when we think about a sneaker drop, right? Sneakerheads go crazy for that sneaker that drops, and it creates all this sort of fandom and excitement around it. And you see the buzz just exceeding any expectation. So for me, this is like very familiar and similar to that. And it's really cool to see how, the numbers speak for themselves, right? Like the drop sort of idea is sort of it doesn't just work in one vertical. It clearly works in all of them.
And to add on to what you're saying, Sarah, I think sneakerheads, a core sneaker fan base, I see it similarly with drops. And I think where it starts to impact casual fans is that halo effect, that trickle down effect, right? I'm not a sneakerhead, but I know sneakerheads. And so I see them get excited around those drops, and I see them talk about it. And that's how I enter the conversation. And I think that similar halo effect, whether it's word of mouth, largely through online discourse, that's how you get it impacting those casual fans who start to have their eyes open to new games or new drops and things like that.
Yeah, it just to keep tacking drops is a fun conversation. I think it's a great way to beachhead a brand into conversation. But I think what we've talked about over this conversation is like a continued drumbeat for brands to continue to authentically engage within that community. And drops is a great way to get to beachhead yourself into that community, but can't be the end all be all. Like you have to think about what are the ways after drops to continue to engage within that community, especially because that community just may be there for the free thing, like regardless of the brand. Which is great because that's the way to get you there. It's just now you have to think longer than that.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's like any drop, right? There has to be that continued amplification in different ways. And so I think what's great though about the drops is, like you said, it's like it gets people's attention. And then once you have their attention, that's when the real, I think, marketing opportunity starts, because now you have them sort of in your hand. And it's really what you do with that. So that would be interesting to see too. Like these numbers are obviously like 7 days, 14, 30 days, but it would be really interesting to see like what happens 6 months from now. Like, are these still the same games that we're looking at, right? Like what have they done in the next 6 months to continue that momentum?
And I think something interesting as well, and Colin or whoever, be curious to kind of hear your thoughts, but Lost Ark was a game that did have drops. And you can kind of see, okay, we had a really steep increase in casual viewers towards the end of that 30 days. I guess any kind of thoughts there?
I would say just goes to my earlier comment, go to core and then it'll trickle down to casual. Tastemakers beget, the more casual audience over time. So when you're thinking like a strategy, how are you reaching that core audience to help influence the taste-making phase of anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Colin. Like, I think in some ways I see casual viewers as late adopters to the games that are new and that they're seeing, right? So it's not that surprising to me for most of these titles to see a steeper rise after the first month, where they've become climatized to that gaming experience. They've seen how difficult Elden Ring is going to be and are now more comfortable trying their hand at it, right? So I think you're absolutely right. Like the core viewers are going to be more willing and excited to jump right on that content, whether it's from drops or a new release, whereas the casual viewers might be a bit more standoffish, get themselves comfortable, and then start to engage.
Awesome. I think we'll go to the last slide here where we look at viewer churn. So this graph is just kind of looking at GTA 5 streaming audience from Q1 of last year to Q1 of this year. So is it surprising to any of you that it looks like it turned over half of its audience from last year? And what do you think drives this churn, not only for GTA, but other games as well?
I'll take a crack at this first, and I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. I think this is more to do with the kind of the like air out of the balloon being released from COVID and people wanting to go do things outside and go do things they couldn't do for 2 years than anything else. And GTA was a form of escape and a lot of forms of entertainment too. And you're seeing this kind of industry wide, not just in gaming, but just like across other kind of stay at home media consumption, seeing kind of a drop as people are just doing things again outside and with other people and so on and so forth. So it's less on GTA and more just on the consumer habits. And maybe COVID moved things forward drastically and we're going to see like a small dip, because I don't think it's the collapse of live streaming. I just think it's just like people are just kind of reverting to some sort of mean again.
Just to add on, so I think like for GTA specifically, I think that all of that's right, by the way. But on top of that is like, it comes back to the RP and like what was driving that initial burst alongside the COVID spike. And when you unpack the RP ecosystem, you have like the core RP creators that have like come up through that space. And then you have a handful of creators kind of around the world, XQC, Sykkuno, Valkyrie, Boozley, who kind of come in and out. And this game specifically is a grinder. You have to literally be improving all day, every day. It requires insane commitment from a creator to like do that and feel that value for their viewers. And I just think over time, for some creators, they love it, they have fun with it, but then they start to change. And so I think some of that shift from creators moving on to other games is driving watch time changes. But that's not to say that then those creators are like, okay, I'm ready to go back to RP. Like Sykkuno started playing RP again yesterday or 2 days ago. And it'll be interesting to see kind of how viewership shifts as creators jump in and out of the server.
Yeah, I think to your point, Jeffrey, that the casual fans, or I guess casual streamers of RP, there's just turnover. If they're not going to play that game for a couple months, we're going to see churn for it. I really think that's a huge kind of layer into this. But again, like I think what's equally as interesting is the fact that they had a bunch, 11 million people that didn't watch last year also tune in this year. So I think it's just moving around, right? A couple of the casual influencers that played a lot last year that may not be this year have been replaced with some other influencers who didn't play last year and now are playing this year. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting kind of turnover. But I think to your point, Jeff, and to your point, Colin, it's not necessarily like, hey, this is a worrisome downturn. It's more like the RP one for Grand Theft Auto is like the best example. It's like that's a very heavy commitment in casual fans. We can't expect to just be burning that the entire year.
Yeah, I was going to echo exactly the point you made right at the end, Nick. I think part of this is what we should expect naturally from turnover and viewership from any game, right? And I think RP had a bit of a moment, right? Like in the second half of last year, arguably all of last year, whether it be GTA or Rust or other RP titles. But I think, yeah, we're just starting to see the natural tail end when it comes to streamer fatigue and audience fatigue, right? Because, a big thing for many of these creators is diversity in their content. Many of the top creators are considered themselves variety streamers. So to consistently stream a title like this would inherently go against their value proposition to their audience, right? So I think some of this we can expect as natural turnover, just based on the intense popularity of the title experience towards the end of last year.
Great. And as we round out, we only have a few minutes left, but we're going to take one more question from Justin, familiar face around here. So he asks, do we think that brands will team up with game launches in the future to combine in-game drops with real-life drops and promotions to increase awareness? What do you guys think about this? And have you seen it kind of happening in real life already?
I think we have a little bit, at least behind direct creators, where you see, when a Call of Duty, and maybe it's not them, but I feel like I've remembered this, like when any big game title is launching, they're also shipping like some super cool, like experiential, need to open it on stream box that also includes something super dope that the creator is excited about talking. So I think we're starting to see that already with creators. How they value that, I think, is super interesting. And then how they scale that to the community within the viewership, I think that's another problem that will need to be tackled.
I would also say, I think Colin brought it up with like the viewership on that last slide is like, COVID obviously impacted people's tendencies to stay inside rather than go outside. And I hopefully think, and I think it's starting to shift in terms of like the brands wanting to not necessarily just create digital experiences, but also now in real life experiences, and how we sort of bridge the gap back to the way we did kind of pre-COVID. Because that's that's the fun thing I think about marketing. And thank you, Justin, for this question. I recognize his face as well. That's what makes it more exciting, is that when we can create an immersive experience that not only happens on a live stream, but also then can be replicated in some capacity in real life, because that really brings the viewer out of their chair and sort of into the game, so to speak. And that's what where we're looking forward to, hopefully this year, probably more next year. So if it's not something that we're currently seeing now, I would imagine as we get more back to normal, it's definitely something we will be seeing more of.
Yeah, I think this goes back to I was kind of talking earlier, which is like brands really have to think about the total program as opposed to treating everything like that is really honestly tactical as the program, right? And like you can go one step further, like what's the experience that ties in like an integration in like a metaverse, or like, Fortnite, Roblox, whatever, that then ties into the content creator economy, that then ties into some real life experience, that then kind of flies wheels back into kind of sort of a metaverse. And like, what does that like all kind of mean, or like what does that all entail? And that really takes some thought, as opposed to like, oh, this is our NBA activation, we're just going to put it in its little corner, and then we're going to go over here and do what's this type of activation. Those things don't talk to each other, but at like some point, the most effective campaigns are going to be completely kind of this like entire flywheel.
I completely agree, Colin. And to build off what you're saying, right, you're already seeing the early peaks and murmurs of trends around NFT ownership of in-game assets. And you're seeing some organizations and even gaming organizations experiment with digital NFT assets that have real world utility. And I think that's a very natural next step for where this can go, right? Drops of things like that, of NFTs that double as VIP passes to events, or behind the scenes videos or tickets or things like that, right? So as we think about how gaming and things like the metaverse and digital ownership and identity continue to evolve, I think there's an opportunity to really lean into that world as a gaming organization and create assets with, again, that real world utility.
Great. Well, we'll ask for any last audience questions. Probably wrap it up in a minute or so, but if anyone else has any final thoughts from the speakers, I'd love to hear it. But otherwise, thank you again for joining us. But any last thoughts here?
No, I think it was great. Covered a lot, I think. But again, back to kind of the points that we talked about before. It's getting that baseline and then kind of learning and being tactful about how to land and expand and not just do it as one-offs. I think one final thought that kind of made me think about that when it comes to Colin's point about how, hey, this traditional sports activation should tie in with this esports activation should tie in with this. I think we see a lot of that more quickly adopting with influencers. Influencer marketing strategy in the last couple of years has changed from, hey, we have some traditional social platforms. Now those are including live streaming platforms, TikTok, et cetera. So that slice, I think, has grown. Where I think I'd like to see some growth as well is so sponsorship starts thinking about that a little bit more connectively as influencer marketers, I think, are.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It was a great conversation, and thanks everyone for watching. Have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.